All right. Hey guys, welcome to episode 1121 of WP Roundtable. My name's Kyle. I run a WordPress agency here in Jackson, Michigan. We build websites for established businesses with complicated needs using WordPress. And I've been doing this podcast here for quite a while now, a couple of years, and it is a lot of fun. And today, we've got a very special guest with us. Before, John, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Well, hey, Kyle, how are you doing today? My name is John Parkinson. I am a WordPress user, and I am chronologically advanced. Back at you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. And our special guest on this fine, wonderful summer evening is Miss Shanta Nathwani from Canada. She is a WordPress developer herself, a WordCamp speaker, a very active person in the community, someone that I've met on numerous occasions and enjoy spending time with. It's a very exciting night to have her with us, get to learn a lot more about her and what she does. Thank you for joining us this evening, Shanta.
Thank you.
So before we get into learning all about Shanta and what she does and where she's been and where she's going, let's talk about our quick picks for the week. My quick pick, real fast, is an awesome blog post that I read recently by a former guest on the show, Boone Gurgis. Now, Boone is a frequent contributor to WordPress core. We all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude for the work that he has done to help make the software that we use every day much better. He's a brilliant WordPress developer, has solved some of the more complicated problems in recent memory that WordPress, the software, has encountered. And he's just generally does a great job. He's a freelance developer. He was on an episode just a few months back, I think, of this show, and we talked with him at length. But he wrote this cool blog post called Indirect Funding and the Limits of Free Software Patronage, in which he talks about the benefit of contributing to open source as a freelancer. And he says it much more eloquently than I could put it myself, how it has affected him and his business, and how it impacts his clients and his relationship with them and the pricing that he can charge. And I think that for those of us who offer client services or work in open source, it's a really good read. There's a lot of great insights that I took away, and I think you will enjoy it. So I'm going to drop a link on the Google Plus event page. And John, do you have a quick pick to share with us?
Well, I do, and it's something that I am personally involved with since the first part of July, probably. The WordPress TV team has been performing video interviews with, we probably have 8 interviews online right now. We started off with Chris Lemma. I interviewed him at WordCamp NEO, Northeast Ohio, and most recently I interviewed Petya, who lives in Bulgaria, and we've been having some great discussions, and you can find that at blog.wordpress.tv, or go to WordPress TV and click the blog link.
Thanks a lot, John. Shanta, do you have anything you'd like to share with us this fine evening?
I do. So I would say that my quick pick of the week would have to be on lynda.com is Morten Rand Hendrickson's lesson on custom post types and custom taxonomies. So one of the things I'm doing right now is teaching a class. I needed to level up a little, and so I took a leap of faith, went on to lynda.com, and his lesson was just absolutely invaluable. So quick shout out to Morten and his wife, who just had their baby last week. Welcome Leo to the WordPress community out in Vancouver. So welcome. We got another one. So but yeah, my quick pick is if you go on to lynda.com, you can usually access it through many educational institutions for free. It is a paid service usually, but you can usually get it through a college, or many of the libraries now have access to it as well. And so if you have access to that, you can look it up free through those portals. And so my quick pick would be his custom post types and custom taxonomies lesson.
Perfect.
There you go.
Morton is an excellent teacher,
That,
and I'm sure that it is a
absolutely.
great, valuable lesson.
Yes, definitely so. Definitely so.
Thank you for sharing. So let's move into talking about you, Shanta. We want to learn all about the things that you've done and you're doing and ever will do, as this is
Okay.
everyone's opportunity to get to know you better. So before we dive into learning about where you are and the services that you provide and everything that keeps you busy these days, let's learn a little bit about your background, shall we? I want to know, back before you really got your career on track, what it is that you really envisioned doing when you were young. What did you set out to do with your life?
So, when I was a kid, so my father is an engineer, and so I was the firstborn. My dad was always very good with sort of bringing into me sort of the idea that I could do anything that I wanted, which was great. And back when I was a kid, it was very unlike young girls to be in code or in technology or any of that sort of stuff. I was known as a tomboy, so I would, go and play superheroes and cowboys and Indians and police and cops and robbers. But I would still be able to play with dolls. Like I basically went wherever the fancy took me. In grade, I guess the summer between grade 5 and 6, I moved to Toronto, and I had no friends. So I picked up a couple of books from, the book club that you get at the school and stuff, and I ordered Basic Programming. And it was like how to program BASIC to like display monsters on the screen. So my first computer was an Atari 800 XL that my dad bought. I have terrible handwriting even to this day. I would hand him book reports in grade 7 typed. And my teachers were like, "What the heck is this?" I'm like, "I got terrible handwriting. I can do this a lot faster." So I was on a computer a heck of a lot earlier than many of my counterparts, especially the girls, which was great. And my dad always encouraged me to do basically whatever I wanted. When I got through high school, people would say to me, "So what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" I go, "I have no idea, but I am not working for my father." Guess what I did when I left high school? That's right. Within a year after I left high school, everybody else went off to post-secondary, and I went to work for my dad. So I went to, by the time I was 21, I was working in real estate, doing project and property management. I was managing 115 units of rent geared to income or nonprofit housing. And I did that for about 6 years. And the hardest breakup I've ever had to do was to tell my dad, "Dad, I love you dearly, but I can't do real estate for the rest of my life." So that's when the whole thing sort of turned around.
And how did that come about? What was next? What you reached that turning point? Was that a sudden realization or a slow realization? And what was your exit strategy?
So the first realization was when we had to do budget reports, right? You've got to make a presentation to the board of directors. Here's where your numbers are. Here's this and this. And I wasn't doing that. I was actually fixing the modem problems because we just gotten the internet. We just had emails. I was wondering, I was on the phone with tech support, and I'm like, "Gee, how does this work? What is this modem thing?" And, like all these kinds of things. And so I found out that I was fixing the technical problems in the office before I was actually doing my real job. So that was sort of my turning point, and that was probably within 6 months. Like it didn't really take me that long. I also hung out in the computer room when I was in high school. I always hang out in the computer room. They are definitely wise people. And so I found myself fixing those problems, and I said, "Dad, I love you dearly, but I can't do real estate for the rest of my life." And so he says, "Fine, let's find you your exit strategy." So he helped pay for me to go back to school. And I was already doing a certificate in business management at Ryerson in night school. He's like, "If you're going to come and work for me, you've got to keep going to school." So I would do like one course a semester kind of thing. I finished my certificate in business management, and then I went right into a post-grad diploma. And I had an interview with the president, who was a friend of my dad's, and he says, "So if you want to do databases, this is what you're going to do. If you like this is what you're going to do." It was sort of like 4 different paths. And he says, "If you want to be sort of front-facing and, get dirty under a desk and, play around with wires. You're going to go into sort of the network administration, webmastering. I went, that's the one. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to be able to be in front of people. Databases was not where I was going to be. Graphics, definitely not. The most artistic that I get is doing origami. That's it. And so I did my diploma in about 6 months and graduated top of the class. 6 months after I graduated, they called me back and asked me to come and teach.
Huh.
That's
So I started teaching Windows Server. Yeah, it was really cool. So I started doing Microsoft Office, Windows Desktop, Windows Server, Linux, like intro to Linux. I never thought I would ever do. I haven't done it in years now, though. And things like that, IP addresses, TCP/IP, I used to get really well. And when I was in class, even when I was doing my diploma, there was one day I remember we were doing TCP/IP and trying to figure out, how this number works with that number. And I was the first one in the class to get it. And so the professor is having a really tough time trying to explain it, or nobody's really getting it. And so I started helping others. It's like a light that goes on. And I turned to somebody and went, okay, here, try this, and if you do it this way. And she's like, you're really good at this. Have you ever thought about being a teacher? And I went home and I told my mom, I go, Mom, I think I figured it out. She goes, I knew that when you were 12. You taught the entire grade 6 class about India that your teacher didn't even lift a finger. So apparently she knew when I was 12 years old that I was going to be a teacher. So 6 months later, I started teaching at the college. And I had been working at a hospital in their PR department. So I was doing a little bit of teaching, doing a little bit of database administration, and answering phones. So I was still doing a bit of the customer service type stuff.
Fascinating. So does that kind of bring us to today, where we're at? You're still
almost. Well, I sort of found that I wasn't doing enough, or I wasn't getting as far in my career as I wanted to go. So I took 3 months off and I went to India and did my Microsoft certification. I came back during the SARS epidemic, so I wasn't sure if I was actually going to be allowed back in the country, but they did let me back in. And of course, by the time I had done that, it wasn't enough, so you have to go back and do your degree. So I actually went back to do my degree about 10 years after all my counterparts did. So I only graduated from my bachelor's degree in about 2009 from Ryerson University in information technology management. After that, I joined a couple of political campaigns, if you can believe it. So, the big Rob Ford thing. So, no, I was not working on his team. I was on another team that actually had to be very close to him. So my candidate finished in, like, the top 3. But I was literally his handler. So I saw, like, all the stuff that went on behind the scenes. It was a real eye-opening experience.
Wow.
And so after I did my second campaign, I moved to Hamilton. Family changes, composition, and I got a call in the September after I moved. Somebody I'd met on the second campaign I worked on, who worked at Sheridan College, said, listen, you know WordPress, don't you? I went, yeah, kind of, sort of. And he says, well, one of our guys needs a co-instructor. Okay, so I joined them, and I've been there now for 4 years. And I just got hired at Mohawk College here in Hamilton, and I just started there about a month ago. So now I'm teaching at 2 different colleges, but still teaching WordPress. And the one that I do at Sheridan is probably the only one that teaches WordPress as part of their full-time program as I know it.
Hey, Shanta, let me ask if, since you waited so long, and because of the circumstances, you said it took you an extra 10 years. Do you think that you appreciated the process and the education more so at that age than you did when you were in your early 20s?
Absolutely. My professors could tell, not just by looking at me, it was the questions I would ask. They knew that I was not the typical student. Things like the questions I would ask, they knew that I had some level of experience. I did an IT project management course in my final year. And they went around the room and they were asking everybody, okay, what I want to know is, what your name is, what your experience with project management is, what you want to get out of this course, and something interesting about yourself. And I was about the second person out of like 70 people. So I said, okay, my name is Shanta. I've had, 5 years project management experience, but it's all been very ad hoc. And so I need to formalize it, which is why I'm taking this course. And something interesting about me is martial arts. And so interestingly enough, I was one of 2 girls in the class, and this is sort of one of my interests is women in technology. So I was one of 2 girls in the class, and it turns out that the other girl did boxing, which is kind of interesting. But one of the guys on the other side of the room happened to say to me, or happened to say when it got around to him, not just that he was in martial arts, but I have a black belt in Taekwondo. It's like, really? Did you have to say that? Like, what was the purpose in telling me what your rank was? And so I couldn't help it, and of course the teacher's trying to play it and sort of saying, oh, well, I'll side with him kind of thing. And I said, well, I'll see your black belt and I'll raise you 2. And he's like, what? Okay, no, I'm with her. I'm with her. So it sort of bespeaks of sort of a larger problem, but I think it's getting better. I think it's getting better.
Fascinating. So that is something that in your you've had work in a number of different kind of like subsets of our field, I think, and in other fields as well. So your insight onto kind of like gender issues in technology and the working field today would be kind of interesting. So I'd like to hear, I think, more if you're willing to share about what your observations.
Absolutely.
In particular, like as you've bounced around maybe to different departments, different academic and IT and project management and business and web technology. What kind of differences have you observed along the way?
So one story that I bring to mind was there are 2. So one of them was when I was working at the hospital, and I remember my boss asked me to do something in particular, and I needed to get certain permissions on the computer from the IT department. So I call up the IT department, the guy comes down, he logs in as an administrator, and I had just graduated from my diploma. So I knew what Active Directory was, I knew how to run a server, I knew what I was looking at. And so he logged in as an administrator on the computer, granted me the permissions, did something else, and then left it there and walked out and was gone. Like, he's like, yeah, I'm done. Bye. And I didn't say anything, but I called my boss in, and I said, I want you to see this because I don't want something else to happen later on and have them think that it was me if they find out later on that I know this. And she's like, well, what is this? I said, would you like to lock out everyone in the hospital other than yourself? Because I can literally from here change every single person's password, including the president. And she's like, whoa. And so I think the assumption is that I was just an assistant, that I was going to do my duty, and I was just going to close it off. And apparently this was sort of indicative of what the IT department was used to doing in that place. And from what I hear, the manager didn't last long after that. Like, that was obviously not the reason he got fired, but it was just one of a long line of things. The other one was so as part of my co-op when I was at university. Funny enough, I did go back to real estate. I ended up working on a help desk at a real estate firm for a real estate investment trust for about 18 months. And I was the first point of contact. It was my job to solve the problem in the first 15 minutes or less. By the time I was done there, I was solving 95% of the problems in the first 15 minutes. And there was barely 5 cases a day that were ever escalated. We were dealing with 122 sites coast to coast in Canada, and I knew almost every single one of them backwards and forwards. I even worked on an AS400. Like, that was really an interesting little project because I learned it while I was there. But the number of people who would call up the help desk and say, "Hi, can I speak to one of your technicians?" "You are." "No, really. Can I speak to one of your technicians, please?" "You are. Actually, it's my job to do that." And I guess the sort of impression that I got was there were many people who thought that, and again, I'm purely speculating, but I guess they assumed that because there was a woman on the other end of the phone that I didn't know what I was doing. That's been a common problem, but I do think that it is improving. For example, even in my courses at Sheridan, there have been days where my co-instructor, Kira, and I have walked in, and I've actually stopped before we get started and go, "Whoa, Kira, you got to see this." And she's like, "What?" I said, "Everybody stand up for a second." And every person in the room is a woman. And we're teaching code. So now, a couple of minutes later, one of the guys walks in and sort of ruins. No, but
Found there.
but I mean, when you've got a class of 40 people and the only people in the room at that moment, which is almost half of the class, at that moment, like there were a ton of people that just didn't show up, but just for one split second in that room, there were only women, and there were certainly more than like 15 of us. And that, especially in an intermediate class where we're teaching them WordPress, we're teaching them PHP, and yes, it is a requirement, and yes, they have to be there, and yes, they have to take this class. But that tells me that there are more and more women getting into technology. And I can honestly say, without actually telling you what their grades are, the women are actually doing a little bit better than the guys in many of our classes. I would have to say that the top person, certainly in our intermediate class, which is where I sort of hand them off, I would say that the last 2 to 3 semesters, the top person in my class has been a woman. They weren't the guys, and they certainly weren't the computer science guys either. Just saying. Because we get a lot of guys that come in, and they are mostly men from computer science, I'll be honest. But they don't do as well in this class because it's not just about the code. It's not just, but the code does scare them quite a bit. But I got to say, the girls have always finished on top, I'd say, in the last 3 semesters that I can recall.
That's great.
Pretty remarkable. Quite an observation. A testament to the reality that you have proven and have experienced. And I do find this to be an interesting topic, and that's something that we've talked a lot about in the past on this show. So if you don't mind, I've got a couple other questions that kind of relate to this.
Sure, fire at will.
Yeah, so because I'm woefully ignorant, obviously, on these kinds of things, and have very little experience or any room to say anything on the topic. So I have a very high level of curiosity about topics like this. Tell me a little bit about what goes through your mind when you encounter those kinds of situations like you've described. What sort of a reaction do you feel internally? Is it anger, frustration, surprise, humor, or very little reaction? Does it really deeply frustrate you, or does it happen so much that you brush it off, or does it motivate you to push for change? Tell me a little bit of just like about the things that go through your mind when you encounter kind of like these blatant assumptions and biases in your industry.
So the biggest ones as of late, as I say, have been in the education field, right? So I've been teaching classes now at Sheridan for the last 4 years, and the biggest occurrence that I've had as of late are my students. Believe it or not, it is not my peers. It is not the administration. It is because, as a matter of fact, our entire web stream, all 3 of our courses that we teach in the web stream, the beginner, intermediate, and advanced, are all taught by women, which is also a very rare thing to see. Because we aren't computer science, right? We're in the arts department, but we are still teaching them that code component. But it's rare to see web design being taught, both from a code as well as a design perspective, by all women. So I think that's important for the students to see, especially that. That being said, though, the I would say that the biggest trouble that I have in the workplace with regards to this kind of thing is from the guys. And it is not from, I should clarify that, from our students. It is not from the administration. It is not from my coworkers. It comes from the students themselves. And it comes from, I think, two places, if I may say so. One of those is that of a culture of what classes they're taking. As I mentioned earlier, computer science. Again, I haven't encountered any of the women that come in that are in computer science, so I'm going to assume, based on my experience, that those are all men, because that's the information I have available. And those guys come in thinking that they know better. And they think that they know code, and they think that they know how to design stuff, and then they don't. It's not even just that they do bad design, they actually do bad code as well. They actually don't follow the instructions that we give them. And here's the other thing too, the students that come into our beginner web design class, which is the second year of their 4-year degree, we assume that 80% of them have never touched code. And I asked them that in the first class of every single semester. And that has held true certainly for the last 3 years of my memory. So I asked them, how many of you have ever touched code before? And out of 40 students, there are barely 4 of them that put up their hands. So we already assume that we have to start from first principles. We take it very slowly, so there's no reason why they shouldn't get this stuff. But there is a certain level from, again, there have been a few exceptions, but for the most part, it is the computer science men that come in, think they know what they know how to do, and so they're just going to ignore everything we say. Guess what? They actually end up, in contrast, they actually do the worst in our classes on average. Go figure. The other part where this comes from is not necessarily from a background of career or scholarly choices, but from a cultural one. I have had a number of students who have come in from even my own culture who assume that because I'm East Indian, or at least part East Indian, that I should know the customs and basically fall in line. Yeah, my dad, I'm the Westerner. I get away with a lot of stuff, even with my own relatives. But it is certainly from, I know that I've had a number of students, not just from computer science, but who are of a different background, who automatically assume, because I'm a woman in their cultural background, that I'm going to bow down. And I'm quite sure that they call me all kinds of nasty names behind their back when I push back. But the fact is, anybody who is your boss, if you are going to survive, whether it be in the WordPress environment, whether it be in a corporate job, wherever it's going to be, you have to at least be respectful of whoever your supervisor is, not your superior, but certainly whoever your supervisor is, whether it's a woman, whether they are of the same background, whether they are of a different sexual preference, whether they're trans, whoever it is. You are going to have to deal with that. And that becomes, I think, an overall comment on some of the students that I have dealt with over the years is, they don't follow the instructions. They just think they know better and just barrel through it. And then they spend more energy after the fact saying, well, you didn't tell me this, or, well, actually it says in the syllabus. That's your contract with the college, right, or with the university. Did you read it? I ran you through it on the first day. I actually read it to you. And it's there in print. So really, how can you do that? So I think in answer to your question, Kyle, I think it comes from two different places. One is that it comes from a cultural background in some cases, and the other is from their more academic background, because they've already been taught how to do some principles of code or whatever have you. But there is a difference between coding software and coding, in Objective-C and all of those other things, than putting out something for the web that people can understand, right? That people are going to see every day, or that is, dare I say it, of a very simple level. You don't have to be an expert to guide a website, and that's where a lot of them fall short, is sort of this wayfinding idea. Like, if you can't show me how to get through a website by clicking on a couple of navigation items, your website is broken. And sort of simple principles like that is, I think, where they miss, but they think they still know better.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that great information. I guess just kind of sort of segueing on that topic a little bit, I was wondering if you could just provide some commentary on what you think about the state of the WordPress community with regards to this topic.
I got to be careful.
You can be frank.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say, I've had the privilege of, so we were talking, one of the things you sent me was about events. So I did my first talk at WordCamp in 2012. And that was at WordCamp Toronto, and they had somebody cancel. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And so it was my first WordCamp, and I've just given them a case study. Okay, so now I'm hooked, right? I'm absolutely hooked. And the next year I did Toronto and I did Buffalo. And then the next year I did 7 of them. So I did New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, a whole bunch of others in 1 year, including Toronto and a couple of others. And then last year I did another 7. And of those, I think I repeated maybe 2 of them. Right? I was in Ann Arbor last year. You guys were kind enough to have me down there. And but all the others were new. And this year, I've done 6 so far. And last year, I co-organized both Hamilton and Toronto. This year, I co-organized Hamilton. I actually resigned from Toronto, and I didn't go. So, and then I'm also on deck, apparently, to do maybe 2 more this year. And this year's actually been really interesting. So I've only done 6 so far this year, but now I'm on deck to do 8. I did Mumbai at the beginning of the year in March, and I completely crowdfunded it. So big thanks to all of my people out there and a lot of the support actually came from the WordPress community, which was great. It wasn't just family and friends. It was people who, talked to me for 20 minutes on a Skype thing and went, she's kind of cool. I'm going to give her $20 towards her campaign. I'm like, that's really awesome. So I'd have to say that the WordPress community as a whole is definitely getting better. But I think it's at kind of a crossroads, certainly with relation to things like WordCamps. I know that Central has put forward a lot of changes this year, and that's put a lot of strain on a lot of the organizers, and they've done really well. And I know that having done Hamilton this year, having a leader like Brian Hogg doing Hamilton was phenomenal. I never felt anything but respect for the guy. He always listened, and I can tell you the guy never lost his cool. I can't believe, so last year I was at one camp. Where was I now? I think it was the end of May. I can't remember exactly where I was in 2015, and they said, what are you, it was Miami. So I was in Miami in 2015, and they said, so when is WordCamp Hamilton? I'm like, next weekend. They're like, and you're here? You're an organizer, and you're doing another WordCamp when your camp is next. How is that possible? Like, is this magic? Is it? I said, no. Brian has it down to an art. The guy is incredible. And we all had our stuff done. We were all cool as cucumbers. And the last 2 years, we have not had a problem. Knock wood, right? And he's run it really, really well. And I enjoy working with him and the rest of the team, for that matter. Right? So when I say I have to be careful, I mean having to resign from a team and not actually going. I'm going to leave it at that. And I hate to say it. I think I might have been right. So there are some things where I could say, you know, some things have changed, like as in, you know, over the last 20 years. You know, plus ça change, plus c'est la même, right? It's the same thing sometimes. And I can honestly say there are some things that have not changed, and which is painful. Painful. I will say it's very painful.
How was your
I know that sounds very vague, but go on.
how was your experience at WordCamp Mumbai?
So interestingly enough, so going back to this whole woman in technology thing too, almost all of the technical talks were given by men. And that was most of Saturday. The women gave most of their talks on Sunday. And the only woman that I remember seeing give any sort of technical talk was Naoko Kanno out of Japan. So, you know, I wonder how that really works. And again, that becomes a bit of a cultural thing. It's I don't know whether necessarily that's something. I don't think it was planned. I just don't think. I think, you know, the Indian women in general. Like even when I've encountered them in my own classes, I'm also the advisor, the alumni advisor at Ryerson University, where I graduated, for their Women in ITM program. And I go in and I give workshops all the time. And I can tell you honestly, from my perspective, the Indian women are taught that they aren't supposed to speak, right? They aren't taught to get their hands dirty. I was very fortunate that my father did allow me to do those things, even as, you know, an East Indian father, you know, in Canada. But I think he was very encouraging of everything that I've done and has guided me through that. So I think that's more indicative of an overall culture, and that the women don't necessarily see it as an option. And if they do, they're not about to get up on stage and speak about it. So I think they have probably a little way to go. But again, I don't think it was an intentional, you can't do this. I think that is an evolution that I think needs to happen. The one thing I really liked was our lunches were really interesting. It's certainly not what you would normally get here. It was one track. That's it, just one track that you had on both. You had one on Sunday and one on Saturday. The people are amazing. Like, hands down, you got to love them all. They were just absolutely amazing. And the support to try and get me there through the crowdsourcing was really good. So Alexander was the lead organizer out there, and he was just awesome. And I had tried to get crowdfunding to go to Pune a couple of months earlier, and I ended up not getting it. And the lead organizer from Pune was actually there, and I'd never met him before, and he actually approached me. And he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Am I like famous or something like that?" Like, but unfortunately, I was not the one who had come the farthest. Oddly enough, Sam Hotchkiss, I think, you know, beat me by a couple of miles. Because he came, I think, from I think it was Arizona, something like that. But anyway, it was technically farther, I think, than Toronto. So I'd have to check on the distance on that one, but pretty close nonetheless. So, but it was really great because I haven't been back to Mumbai in about 10 years, so I sort of piggybacked a family trip on that whole thing. So it was great to see some family again and do some shopping. I am not a big clothing shopping person, but when I'm in Mumbai, forget it. It's all over. It's all over.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now and catch people up. So you're still teaching. You're teaching at 2 schools. Is there anything you're doing, any freelance work on the side?
Ooh, I wish I could, but the reality is that the teaching does keep me really busy. So I did start a company with my co-instructor, Kira Howe, back in September called Web Weapons. And so we tried a couple of things, and honestly, it was just a lot to do with the teaching. That's not to say that it's completely gone away, but it's on the back burner for now. And who knows, what the new year, everything starts up again in September. So, come September, things can change, things can, mobilize in different ways. But I know that on her own time, she actually just put out her first plugin in the repository the other day. So, that could lead to a whole bunch of other stuff. So, way to go, Kira. And based on the lesson that I did with Morton, Kira's always telling me, go just build a plugin. I'm like, Kira, I'm not a developer. Like, I can't build my own plugin. Like, I don't know how to do that. And guess what? I built my first plugin with Morton's lesson. So,
cool.
You know what?
Mm-hmm.
I'm now going to go through the whole series. Like, as soon as I get a week off, I'm probably going to be doing a lot of marking. But that will also mean that I can sort of level up on some of those skills. So that'll be a lot of fun. But but I'm teaching at Sheridan College, which is a degree program through the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and they learn about the business stuff on that side of it, and then they come to us to learn the fun stuff. So they only get out of their entire degree 3 of these web courses, and that's it. But they learn about graphic design, photography. These are going to be the managers, right? They're going to have to deal with all these creative people, and they're going to have to know the lingo. They're going to have to know a little bit about what they're doing. The difference is that Mohawk, I'm actually teaching, and again, going back to the whole women in technology thing, we've actually got a program right now that is sponsored by the YWCA, or it's funded by the YWCA. And all of the people in this program are women. It's actually called the Women in Technology Program. And they are doing an intensive 2-month certificate, which they would normally do like 1 class per semester in night school. They've got 8 of them combined into 2 months.
Great.
Whoa. And they're just blowing me away. So I'm now teaching them what we call WordPress 1. And the difference is that the guys at the Sheridan UTM side are going to become managers. They're not necessarily going to be the developers and whatever. We maybe have 5% that leave the program that actually go into that kind of a field. Whereas with this thing at Mohawk, they are leaving with a web design certificate. Like, that's all they're going to do. And the difference is that one is full-time, one is continuing ed. And it's like night and day, right? The full-time guys, in some ways, it's like pulling teeth. You're going to have some students that will just excel, and they will listen to every word you say, and they are just wonderful, absolutely amazing, amazing people. But there are going to be those that are going to complain and drag their feet and come up with more excuses than you can ever poke a stick at. On the CE side, it's going back to your earlier question, right? Is that I went back 10 years later. Did I appreciate it? These guys appreciate it, right? I walked into class, last week, and they said, "Oh, Shanta, we are so glad to see you." I'm not used to that. Like, it's just, I can really appreciate sort of going back, and because I've done them all, continuing ed and stuff like that, it's been a real difference. So I haven't done as much consulting, but we do a capstone course where we actually pair our students with real live clients. And those usually end up coming through me, through my network, and we teach them how to deal with those real life clients. So a lot of that ends up coming from me as well, because I've done quite a bit of it. But who knows what the new year will bring? Just saying. Keep your eyes open, stick on Web Weapons to find out. Who knows?
Cool. Hey, let me ask, I think that you attended WP Campus.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
So Kira Howe, who's my co-instructor, and I gave a case study on what we do at Sheridan College, and with WordPress specifically. So the first thing was what we teach them.
Okay, let
right? So we are, yeah, go ahead.
Let me interrupt. Could you give a little bit of background about WP Campus first, and then you can go into your.
Sure thing. So WP Campus, this was the inaugural WP Campus. So it was the first WordPress campus for higher education. And if Rachel's watching, just so you know, we have it here. We got these amazing certificates.
Oh, cool! With a wall too.
And it is. It says, it says, with all the rights and privileges thereto appertaining in witness thereof, this notice of appreciation duly signed has been issued and the WAPU of education affixed.
Cool.
Wow. Like, this was awesome. And so people like Josh Pollock and everybody were like, oh, look, this is going up next to my degree. This is cooler. So anyway, so there you go, Rachel. Mine's sitting right here. I promise you. And all the speakers, the sponsors, organizers got this. So so it's not necessarily done under the auspices of WordCamp Central. They did follow that same sort of formula, but they didn't have, it wasn't based on region. It was based on a particular vertical. And you're seeing more and more of these coming out these days, right? It's sort of that vertical. And so I know that I overheard somebody say, and I absolutely agree, is that the conversations were different, right? You go to a local WordCamp or a camp that is designed by region, and yes, you might have the conversations about, and you'll forgive me for the Ann Arbor thing, parking in Ann Arbor. I think I told you about my parking experience. I did write a letter to the mayor, by the way. I'll tell you about it later. But anyway, I wrote a letter to the mayor. I was so pissed off. But anyway, but you'll get those kinds of conversations. But it's not necessarily pertaining to what you're there for. You know, it's kind of a side conversation. Whereas the conversations you'll have at those sort of regional camps is around, and you'll have different levels of people, but you might have a business that runs healthcare, or you might run a blog that does car appreciation or whatever. There's very little overlap. So they're almost at two ends of the spectrum. You'll have people that are running e-commerce, that are running a blog, that are running enterprise. Like it's all over. It's such a diverse sort of group of people. Whereas at WP Campus, everyone there has a connection to begin with, which made the conversations very different. Conversations around things like, okay, so what are you doing at your school? You already have a basis of conversation other than just the region in which you live. And some people worked in the IT department. There were some that were managing upwards of 10,000 sites. 10,000 sites simultaneously. That blew my mind. Like, we have enough just running a server under somebody's desk. You know, like the IT department runs our server, and the number of times we had to go, hey guys, you got to, fix it. That is the only WordPress that is working right now in our entire, our school's website is running on some other CMS, and it's horrible. It's really horrible. So the only WordPress that is actually being done in the college right now is us. We're the only ones doing it, and it's only for 2 classes. Now, we put through over 200 students a year, but even so, I'm sure it's sitting on a box under somebody's desk, right? So that kind of dichotomy was just amazing. But it came around ideas of, who's using it? Well, the instructors are using it, the students are using it. So then you have a common conversation, which was great. How do you manage those student installs? How do you manage the instructor installs? How many installs? Does each, department or pocket or class get to run their own, right? Things like around security. Do you run it on campus or do you run it off campus? What are the benefits and stuff of each? Which brings me to what we were talking about. So we ended up doing a case study showing what we do at Sheridan. And what we showed was, this is what we teach our students, and this is why. And here are the tools that we give them. So for example, in our beginner web design class, we have HTML and CSS. Like, that's it. We give them a bit of a lecture on the culture part of it, and then we give them a lab, which is where Kira takes over and shows them how to code it and so on. And that code ends up being testable, meaning that Kira has devised a system in which Students can upload it onto the server. They can paste the link and say, test it. And it will run through all of its checks and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. So they can sit there and test it all day long if they want to. But the goal here is that just because they get it wrong the first time, they have a chance now to go back and fix it. And that becomes part of the learning, especially when you're dealing with code. You're going to learn from your mistakes. That is how we all learn. So for them to be able to go through, if they want to test it 200 times, let them test it 200 times. And their goal is to actually get 10 out of 10 on that lab. So we've devised one that is specific to our course that will actually do like 6 out of the 7 labs that we teach in that beginner class. So that is one of the tools that we give them. The other one is a forum, which is based on BuddyPress and BBPress. So David Bissett absolutely loved that. He was sitting in the front row. So hi, David. So he had sort of an interest in that. And so what we've done is we've now built a forum. We get all of our account numbers from the IT department. And Kira's devised it in such a way that when they register on the forum, it automatically goes and says, okay, based on the class that you've chosen, you're either getting one from this block or one from this block. So for example, beginner and intermediate. If you pick one from the beginner class, you're getting an account out of here that doesn't have WordPress installed. If you go into the intermediate class, it's going to give you one of the ones that does have WordPress installed. And it will actually hand you that number, it will actually pass you the password, and then you just continue on. Now it's a bit of a pain because you have to go through all of these steps. So at Mohawk, we've actually decided we weren't going to use their IT department. We devised it ourselves. So we've actually got that same sort of system now running on an Amazon server. And now Kira has full control over what goes on the server and can actually pass passwords back and forth. So now when they register on the forum, it not only hands them an account, it actually creates the account on the fly, passes the password over to that, creates, their WordPress installation right then and there. So it only creates as many accounts as are needed based on, so they're only going to get one, rather than having all of these accounts that are populated ahead of time. So they pass that over. And so now we have the ability to reset their passwords on cPanel, which we would normally have to go to IT for. And they usually say, yeah, you know what, we're not going to reset the password, or it can take them a week to get to resetting a password. Now we get to manage it ourselves. So part of what we were talking about at campus was, at WP Campus, was that we were going to devise this system. And now we're testing it out. And then the last part, which our students don't know, is that we have tools in the back end that we can catch them cheating. And I'm quite sure that none of them are watching this, and that none of them were watching our live stream, so they still don't know. But we have ways of actually testing their code against each other. It's almost like a Turnitin for code. Now Kira does sort of manually go through some of those, but things like a Wayback Machine. We actually have a Wayback Machine that will run on both of these servers, so that if we ever need to know, for example, did this student copy it from this student, we can see what they were doing at a particular time. We just had a case of suspected plagiarism, where one student copied another. Well, we went to one student's backup files, which they don't know we keep, by the way, and we were able to see, look, this is the file that she had on this day, this is a file that she had on this day, but you can see a progression. She's working on it, right? The other girl had broken code, broken code, broken code, and about 10 minutes after this girl submitted it, she had working code.
Huh.
It wasn't complete, but it was still working. So who are you going to believe? Right? But the students don't know that we sort of run this kind of stuff in the back end. So that was basically what we presented, was this sort of case study, and some of the challenges that we have with working in our own IT department at the college. But we like I said, we use BuddyPress, we use BBPress, and so and now every semester we have to change those forums. Right? We now have to archive whatever's there, and we've been building that forum now for the last 3 years. And so now you've got a knowledge base that has been built over the 3 years. And the reason we decided to build that on WordPress is that if you build it in the learning management system, as soon as the class ends, it goes away. And we're teaching a minimum of 2 of those classes at any given time. So if a question comes in one class of the intermediate and another class of the intermediate, they don't see each other. Well, now we have something that's been being built over the last 2 or 3 years that is archived, that they can search, that each class can talk to each other. And we've actually said for the intermediate class, by the way, it is mandatory that they have to use that forum. It is part of their mark. We actually allocate 5% of their grade towards contributing to that forum. And even if it's, hey, I found this great article. Okay. And I've actually said to the intermediate guys that if you actually answer questions from the beginners, I'll count that too. And I'm okay with that. You're at least contributing to a community, which speaks to the larger WordPress community as a whole. So we're actually training them to be WordPress people right from the get-go, even from second year onwards. And so every year, like I say, we have to archive those pieces and then take a template and reissue those for the next semester. So they'll have an archive, but then this is the current semester, this is the current semester. The plugin that Kira has just developed is that templating system. So it will now look at whatever that template is and say, do you want to recreate this template? It's basically a bbPress templater, if you will. And she just submitted that to the repository over the weekend. So now everybody can use it, and it's an amazing, amazing tool.
Awesome. That's some pretty exciting stuff, Shanta. I had really a couple more questions I was hoping to talk about, but we're pretty much winding down and getting to the end of our hour here. So I'm gonna have to move into kind of just like some of our wrap-up questions here, real quick.
Go for it. I will come back, Kyle, anytime for you.
Aw, that's so sweet. That sounds like a really good plan too. So thanks for the good idea. And so let's see. Looking at your calendar ahead for maybe the rest of 2016, early 2017. Where exactly do you think anybody who wanted to might bump into you in person?
Okay, so Milwaukee. WordCamp Milwaukee is going to be on September 16 and 17, I believe. And they just released their website a couple of days ago. They had some, Central had to sign some stuff, so they got out of the gate a little bit late. Speaker submissions are open until August 22nd, I've heard, so I will be submitting a few on that. So will Kira, so if you want to peg her down, I got her to commit today. She's coming with me. So we'll be in Milwaukee in just over a month. We will also, I think we'll also be in Rochester, unfortunately the same weekend as Ann Arbor. So I will just be, a couple across the border there. So I actually might hit 8 WordCamps this year, especially when I said I was actually scaling back this year. I'm an addict. What can I say? Hi, my name is Shanta. I'm a WordCamp addict. Yeah.
Well, I hope you don't find a cure, because it's really nice bumping into you at these events.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So, give me some ideas. You know a lot of people in the community. You've been out and about quite a bit. Who do you suggest that I invite to be on the show in the future?
I'm a little bit biased. So I'll give you a couple of suggestions. One is Mark Benzakein, if you haven't had him already.
Who?
Gotta have Mark Benzakein. He's really a fun guy.
Yeah.
What?
I think we can arrange that.
Cool. Yeah. And the other one, which you've heard me mention the name, and I know she's going to hate me for it, is you got to get Kira on here.
Yeah.
Kira Howe. She will run you through, her experiences with. I mean, like that, she just submitted her first plugin. to the repository. She's been building stuff for years, and as a woman in the community, always about women in the technology side, especially in the WordPress world. So I would say, convince her to come on here next. And if you're watching, Kira, I said so.
Can't back out now.
No.
She actually has to do what I say, but I'll tell you about that afterwards. But yes, I'll say it off air. But yeah, she actually has to do what I say. Anyway.
That's a great suggestion.
So there you go. Those are my two.
Before we wrap up here, is there anything in closing that you would really like to share? This could be some action item you would like to encourage people to do or participate in, or just anything that we failed to touch on that you're really hoping to share with us.
Well, I think I touched on most of it. By all means, send me those follow-up questions. I'd love to see what else you're going to ask. So, maybe I can write a blog post on it, which is something I definitely need to do more of. I just had my first article as a follow-up to WP Campus on the WP crowd. They actually just added me as a contributor. So maybe I can answer those questions over there. But anybody who's watching, get out in your community. If you haven't been to a WordCamp before, go and learn something new. I did, like I said, about a weekend ago, I did Morton's stuff on the long weekend, and I'm excited. I really am. And I was tweeting at him the whole weekend, and he was like, "No, did you try this?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I figured it out." And so go and learn something new. Go to a WordCamp and go and learn something new.
I couldn't have ended it better myself, Shanta. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's episode 111, everybody. I'm Kyle, and I'm here with John Parkinson, Shanta Nathwani. We've had a great hour, a great chat, learned a lot about Shanta, things that I didn't know, and took some good insight away. You have some great stuff to share, Shanta, so thanks. I do recommend you pick back up on the blogging, because you've got a lot of things that people would be interested in learning. So, thanks anybody for watching. Thank you guys for joining me this fine evening, and have a good evening.
See you, Kyle. See you, Shanta.